When is it terrorism versus a mass shooting? For that matter, when it is an act of violence worth covering? And just how sympathetic should the media be to targets of attacks when the targets themselves were the provocateurs? These were just a few of the options the media had to weigh this year. The year began ominously when the Paris-based satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo was the target of assassins. 12 people were gunned down, their crime drawing caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad, images considered blasphemy in Islam.
We can't caricature Muhammad in France, so yes, we can caricature Muhammad. We can caricature everyone in France.
But even in coverage of the massacre, most U.S. media outlets avoided using images of the cartoons, citing needless provocation. Also testing the media's balancing act, coverage of terrorism near and far. San Bernardino, Charlie Hebdo, and the November Paris attacks that left 130 dead received immediate and non-stop coverage. But a marketplace bombing in Lebanon where 43 died a day before the Paris attack was barely mentioned. Same with attacks by Boko Haram in Africa. Also giving the press pause, terminology. Masses of people fleeing Syria were interchangeably called refugees or migrants.
We're running now with these migrants and refugees.
But most were not seeking asylum, making them migrants. Less clear-cut, the Charleston church shooting that left 9 dead, opening a debate over whether that was terrorism or a hate crime, and why white men who commit despicable acts are mentally ill, while blacks and Muslims are terrorists.
It's an active investigation with the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
Equally confusing, the very name itself. The president says ISIL, the media says ISIS, now world leaders say Daesh. All I can say is Ish. Going back to the Charlie Hebdo, as you recall, over the summer the PEN Awards took place, and a number of writers actually refused to attend, saying that because they were celebrating and honoring a number of the people that were killed in that attack. They're saying, you know, it was an intentional provocation in the name of free speech, as was that woman Pamela Geller with the American Freedom Institute. And she had that cartoon drawing contest, as you recall, in Texas. 2 gunmen tried to shoot it up. They were lucky nobody was hurt in that. But again, she was declaring free speech, and yet she was intentionally provoking a certain element by doing something that was blasphemous in that. So it's, you know, a fine line.
Well, she ought not be mentioned in the same breath with the
Charlie
Hebdo people, and shame on Gary Trudeau and Joyce Carol Oates and the other moronic, knee-jerk quislings who got swept up in this little fatwa of theirs against free speech. The people at that magazine caricatured and performed satire on everyone. And actually, the kind of Muslim baiting, if you will, was a very minor part of what they did. And for them to come out after what happened and try to make an issue of it, I thought it was one of the premier disgraceful episodes of the year.
You know, John, I agree with you. I guess the nuance I would put on it is I absolutely defend the free speech right of anybody to engage in any kind of speech that they want. I don't know that I would celebrate it. I do think that, you know, Gary Trudeau and Joyce Carol Oates and the others you mentioned, they should be hanging their heads in shame, absolutely. But at the same time, I don't know that I would be celebrating.
Was it celebrated or just defended after a vicious assault?
I would certainly defend it, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, you know, as you said in your package, there's a couple things going on here. And these are all the kind of nuance that we don't typically take the time to think about until something happens. And then you're like, okay, how do we describe this? How are we to perceive this? And what is the public response to it as well? And so this was, for me, a both and an and situation. There, you know, for sure, Pamela Geller, that was absolutely provocative. That she was clear about it. Tell them to come get me. I'm right here, you know, because this is what I believe. In the case of Charlie Hebdo, there they are doing their job across the board, coming right close to it. And for a lot of people, that's their faith. And so there you go. I don't know. I mean, we're going to have many, many more conversations about this because we have we don't deal with nuance well. So let me just say that.
Well, to that point, I
Yeah.
think the term that we still haven't
Yeah.
wrapped our brain around, even after everything that happened this year, is terrorism,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
when we should use it, how we should use it, if violence needs to be committed in the name of an overarching ideology to be terroristic, or if simply aiming to inspire terror for its own sake, as so many mass shooters seem to, qualifies as terrorism too. And also the whole domestic terrorism versus international terrorism distinction. What happened in San Bernardino happened here in the U.S. It doesn't seem to have been directed by someone from outside the country, but they were apparently sympathizers of ISIS or ISIL or Daesh or whatever you want to call it. We still haven't figured that out. And again, I think it's in large part
But
because the media doesn't love terminological
Well, we
nuance,
don't
nuance
like
in
it,
general.
and but there's a proper terminology, and the Justice Department in our country determines whether something is a terrorist act.
So
or not.
when should we say domestic versus international terrorism, or just domestic?
Well, we can't
terrorism
even
versus
say
terrorism?
domestic terrorism unless the Justice Department says it is.
Wait, now, but
Well, I
why
think
is
we
that
can.
though? I think, yeah, exactly.
I think we
Why
can.
can't we? We can say
I-
whatever
We can say
want.
it, but they're the ones making the declaration.
Well,
question
yeah,
is
but
what's
I mean,
illegal, I guess.
these words have legal definitions, and they also have real life definitions. And I mean, one of the things that continues to kind of boggle my mind is that we had a terrorist attack on an abortion clinic just days before San Bernardino, and that seemed to have been completely forgotten.
That was hate crime. I mean,
Well, but it was also,
I know.
a guy with a radical, very violent pro-life agenda who said no more baby parts as he committed the crime. So there's the ideology right there.